He was a billionaire with everything until he found the waitress who once believed in him when no one else did. What he did next changed both their lives forever. Daniel Malik was no ordinary man. Just 34 years old, he had become one of the richest tech businessmen in the country. He was the kind of man who lived in mansions with glass walls, drove cars that cost more than most people's homes, and spoke on stages where thousands clapped for him. But deep inside, Daniel was tired. The interviews, meetings, fake smiles, and pressure to be perfect had all become too much. So one weekend, without telling anyone, he took his car and started driving alone, hoping to clear his mind. Bodyguards, no assistants, no business calls. Just him, the open road, and silence. He ended up in a small, quiet town that he hadn't visited in years. It wasn't famous. No tall buildings, no loud traffic, just old shops, clean air, and people who smiled when they walked past you. Something about the town felt calm. It reminded him of simpler times. Daniel parked his car near a gas station and walked down the road. A small diner with a faded red sign caught his eye. The kind with big windows and metal chairs that made a soft screech when you pulled them. It wasn't fancy, but it looked warm. It's the kind of place where people knew each other by name. Daniel pushed the door open and a little bell rang above. A few families were sitting in booths, and an old man was sipping soup at the counter. It felt real, not polished, not rich, just real. He sat at a table near the window. The waitress came over with a menu in her hand and a gentle smile on her face. "Coffee to start?" she asked. Daniel looked up and froze. The world around him seemed to stop moving. Voice was familiar, soft but strong. The same voice he remembered from so many years ago. His eyes widened as he stared at her face. She looked a little older, her hair tied in a loose ponytail, with tired eyes and faint lines around her cheeks. But there was no doubt. It was Emily Shaw, his old school friend. He almost said her name out loud, but held back. Him. Or maybe she did, but was pretending not to. She just smiled kindly and poured him a cup of coffee. Her uniform was clean but faded. Her shoes looked worn out. Her hands had small cracks from too much work and too little rest. She moved from one table to another, smiling at everyone, writing down orders, carrying heavy plates. And the entire time, Daniel just watched her, memories flooding his mind. Back in school, Emily had been the bright one. The girl who always got top marks, helped others, and stood up for anyone being treated badly. Daniel had been the quiet boy in the corner, often bullied because his clothes were old or his lunchbox was empty. Emily had been his only real friend. She'd sit with him at lunch, share her sandwiches, and even defend him from kids twice her size. She once punched a boy who called Daniel worthless and got detention for it. She never cared. "You're worth more than you think," she'd told him with fire in her eyes. Daniel remembered how she used to talk about becoming a writer. She'd show him her notebook filled with poems, stories, and dreams. He used to laugh and say, "You'll be famous one day." She'd grin and say, "Only if you promise to read my book when it comes out." But now, here she was serving coffee in a small-town diner. Daniel stayed longer than he planned. He ordered a burger he didn't even want, just so he could watch her work. He noticed how she winced slightly when bending down, maybe from back pain. He saw her giving a free muffin to an old lady who clearly didn't have enough money. She was still the same kind, selfless, always giving more than she had. When she finally returned to his table with the bill, he took a deep breath. "Emily," he said softly. She looked up. Her eyes searched his face for a moment. There was silence. Then she blinked in surprise. Daniel Malik?" Cracked just a little. He smiled gently. "It's been a long time." Her mouth opened slightly in shock. Then a small, nervous laugh escaped her. "I didn't recognize you. You look different." "Money and stress do that to people," he replied, trying to sound light. They spoke for a few minutes, just polite small talk. He didn't ask too many questions because he could see she wasn't comfortable. She acted like she was fine, said things like, "I'm doing okay and just busy with work." But Daniel could hear the truth hiding behind her words. Her eyes didn't shine like they used to. Her smile was practiced. When he mentioned school, she looked away, like the memories were too heavy when he left. He gave her a tip that was more than the price of the meal. She tried to refuse, but he gently placed it in her hand and walked away. In his car, Daniel sat still for a long time, stared at the diner through the windshield. Something inside him hurt, more than any business failure ever had. He had met many people in life, investors, politicians, celebrities, but very few had hearts like Emily's. And now she was struggling, while he had more than he could ever spend in a lifetime. He drove to a nearby hotel and checked in for the night. But sleep didn't come. He kept thinking about her. Why was she working in that place? What happened to her dreams? What happened to her family? Why wasn't she a writer like she wanted to be? His mind raced with questions, and his heart felt heavy with guilt. He had lost touch with her after school, too focused on building his empire. He'd told himself it was just how life went. But now, seeing her like that, didn't feel right. The next morning, Daniel returned to the diner. Emily was surprised but smiled warmly. Back again. Couldn't resist the coffee, he joked. Over the next few days, he kept coming back. Sometimes he ordered breakfast, sometimes just tea. Slowly, Emily began to open up a little. She told him she had a son, that she lived nearby, and that life had been a little tough over the years. But she never complained, not once. She made it sound like everything was under control, but Daniel knew better. Saw the tiredness in her walk, the sadness behind her eyes. She was surviving, not living. One night, as he sat in the diner with barely 3 other customers around, he noticed something. Emily was wearing a small bracelet on her wrist. It was old. The silver had faded, but he recognized it instantly. It was the same one he had given her in school, a cheap friendship bracelet he'd bought from a roadside shop. She had laughed when he gave it to her, and promised to wear it forever. She was still wearing it. That one small thing broke something inside Daniel. She had remembered him. She had held on to that piece of the past. And now, when she was at her lowest, he had the power to change her future. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. But this time, it wasn't guilt keeping him awake. It was purpose. A deep, unshakable feeling that he had to do something. Not out of pity, but because it was right. Emily had helped him when he had nothing. She had given him hope when the world ignored him. Now it was his turn to give something back. What started as a surprise meeting was about to become the beginning of something life-changing, for both of them, and Emily had no idea what was coming next. Daniel kept coming to the diner every single day. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. He would sit at the same table near the window where he could watch Emily work. At first, she smiled politely, thinking he was just being kind, or maybe nostalgic about their old school days. But then she began to feel something strange. He wasn't there for the food. He hardly touched his pancakes, and sometimes his coffee got cold. He came to see her. Still, Emily didn't ask questions. She had gotten used to people coming and going in her life. She didn't want to hope for anything, because life had taught her that hope often led to disappointment. So she stayed friendly, but distant. She'd laugh at his jokes, talk about simple things like the weather or how bad the town's traffic was. But every time he tried to go deeper, asked how her son was doing, what she did after school, or how her writing was going, she would change the subject or give short answers. Daniel noticed this, and it made him even more curious. Why was she so guarded? What had happened to the girl who used to dream so loudly, who used to believe that anything was possible? One evening, after the dinner crowd had thinned out and the kitchen was closing, Daniel waited until her shift was almost over. He noticed her wincing while cleaning a table. Her hand touched her lower back, and she took a deep breath like she was in pain. He walked up to her and gently said, "You okay?" She gave a half smile. "Just tired. Double shifts are no joke." Nodded. "Do you have time for a quick coffee after work?" She looked surprised, but didn't say no. After a moment, she said, "Sure, there's a bench outside. It's quiet there." They sat together outside, under the soft glow of a street lamp. The wind was cool, and the town was quiet, except for the sound of distant cars. bower May wide. Her arms around herself, partly because of the cold, partly out of habit, Daniel handed her the coffee he bought from inside. They sat in silence for a few minutes before he finally said, "I've been thinking a lot about you." Emily gave a small laugh. "That's strange to hear." "Why?" "Because most people, from my past, don't think about me at all." Daniel turned to her. "That's their loss. You were always unforgettable." Her smile faded a little, and her eyes looked away. "Why did you stop writing, Emily?" She didn't answer at first. She looked down at her hands, the coffee cup shaking slightly. Then she spoke, her voice quiet. "After high school, I got into a good college. I was going to major in literature. I was so excited. My parents were proud of me. I thought everything was finally going to fall into place." She paused, took a shaky breath. "But 2 months before I was supposed to leave, my dad died of a heart attack. And 6 months later, my mom got into a car accident. I was 19, alone, and broke. No money for college, no family left." Heart sank. He had never known this. He had been in another city at the time, working hard on his first software company. Life had pulled them in different directions. While he was building his empire, she had been losing everything. "I started working full-time," she continued. "First at a grocery store, then here at the diner. Rent was high, bills kept coming, and then I found out I was pregnant." Daniel's head turned sharply. "You have a son." She nodded. "His name is Noah. He's 9 now. He's the reason. I wake up every day." "Where's his father?" Daniel asked carefully. Emily gave a tired laugh. "Gone. He left when I was 5 months pregnant. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad. Never came back." Daniel clenched his jaw. He wanted to find the man and punch him, but he stayed quiet. Emily went on. "There was no time to write stories or dream about books anymore. I had to feed my son, pay the rent, keep the lights on. Some nights, I worked double shifts, came home at midnight, then got up at 6 to get Noah ready for school." Daniel felt like he was hearing a story that didn't belong in her life. This wasn't the Emily he remembered. She had always been strong, but seeing her carry so much alone, it made his chest hurt. "Do you have anyone now?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just Noah and me." For a long time, they sat in silence. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about how unfair life had been to her. She had given so much to others, and life had taken everything from her. And yet here she was, still smiling, still working hard, still being kind. He walked her to her car that night. It was an old beat-up vehicle that took 3 tries to start. As she drove away, Daniel stood there, frozen. He knew what he had to do. The next day, he called his personal assistant and gave a list of instructions. He wanted a full background check done on Emelina to invade her privacy, but to understand what she was facing. He also wanted her debts cleared, anonymously. If she had late rent, overdue medical bills, or school fees for Noah, they were to be paid in full, quietly, without any trace leading back to him. He also asked his assistant to look into Noah's school records. If the boy was talented, he would sponsor his education. If not, he'd still pay for a better school. He believed every child deserved a chance. Daniel then made another bold move. He contacted a lawyer to help him buy the diner through a hidden company name. His plan was to give Emily control of the place later as a surprise. He didn't want to hand her a check. He knew she would never accept it. She was too proud. But if she became the owner of the diner, she could change her life, and others too. She'd have income, control, and a new beginning. Every evening, he kept visiting the diner. Emily noticed he seemed different now, calmer, more thoughtful. He didn't ask many questions anymore, just listened. Sometimes he helped her carry dishes or wipe down the table. The other staff thought he was just some sweet regular who liked the waitress. No one knew he was a billionaire. Daniel didn't want anyone to treat him differently one day. While clearing a table, he saw a drawing tucked into Emily's notebook. It was a sketch of a small cafe with bookshelves lining the walls. In the middle was a mother and son, laughing. Over a cupcake, Daniel looked up and asked, "Did you draw this?" Emily looked embarrassed. "Just something I scribbled during breaks. It's beautiful. What is it?" She shrugged. "Just a dream." A place I imagined where people could eat and read, and kids could sit with their moms without being rushed. Daniel smiled. Sounds like a dream worth chasing. Emily looked away. Not everyone gets to chase their dreams. That night, Daniel made another decision. Not only would he give her the diner, but he would help her turn it into that cafe from her drawing. He started speaking with designers, artists, and builders, making secret plans. He wanted everything to be perfect. He knew this wouldn't fix all her problems, but it would give her something no one had offered her in a long time, a second chance. While he planned in silence, Emily went home every night exhausted. Still unaware that the man sitting at her table every day was about to change her life, she didn't know that her son's school had just called. Daniel to say he was one of the brightest students in his class. She didn't know that her rent had quietly been paid ahead for the next 6 months. She didn't know that a future she had once given up on was slowly being built, piece by piece, by someone who had never forgotten her kindness. And Daniel, though surrounded by billions, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because he wasn't just building a project, he was rebuilding a person's dream. And soon, Emily would find out the truth. Daniel's mind had already made the decision. He was going to change Emily's life, no matter what. Not out of pity, but out of deep respect, old friendship, and a quiet pain in his heart that he could no longer ignore. For too long, she had suffered in silence. She had given everything to others, to her child, to her work, and now it was time someone gave something back to her. He didn't tell Emily anything. Instead, he began to work in the background, silently, carefully, like a builder shaping a surprise gift with his bare hands. The first thing he did was contact a lawyer he trusted deeply. He told him to create a company, one that would act as the buyer of the diner Emily worked at. Daniel didn't want the purchase to look like a gift. He knew Emily well, or found out. He bought the place for her. She would feel awkward, maybe even angry. She was proud, independent, and strong. She didn't want charity, so Daniel created a plan where everything would seem like a miracle, something she earned, not something handed to her. His assistant Michelle helped organize the financial part. Within a few days, Daniel had quietly bought the entire diner, using a shell company called Bright Morning Group. No one in the town knew. The previous owner was an older man who had been thinking of retiring anyway. He was more than happy to sell the place when the offer came in. What shocked him most was the price. Daniel paid him double what the property was worth. He didn't care about the money. All he cared about was giving Emily control of a business she could grow, love, and turn into something new. While that process continued quietly, Daniel also had his team begin renovations planning. At night, after the diner closed, a local interior designer would visit and take pictures, measurements, and discuss small upgrades. Daniel told them to make the changes slowly, so Emily wouldn't notice anything too big too quickly. She would just think her boss was improving the place, little by little. The kitchen was cleaned and updated. New paint samples were tested, lighting was fixed, were replaced one by one with softer, more beautiful ones. A few bookshelves were placed near the entrance, just like the drawing Daniel had seen in Emily's notebook. Every change was a piece of her old dream being quietly brought to life. Emily did notice some things, of course. One day she asked her manager, "Why is the place getting so many upgrades suddenly?" The manager just shrugged and smiled. "The new owners want to improve business. Guess we got lucky." Emily smiled, but deep inside, she was confused. Had been working at that diner for 6 years. No one had cared before. The roof had leaked for 2 winters straight, and now it was suddenly fixed. The coffee machine was replaced. The restrooms were cleaner than ever. It didn't feel like luck. It felt like something else. But she didn't press the issue. She was just grateful. Meanwhile, Daniel started checking on her life outside work. He sent someone to make sure her neighborhood was safe. He quietly paid off all her late electricity bills, internet bills, and old credit card debt. Her landlord was surprised to receive a full rent payment for the next 6 months. When he tried to find out who paid, he couldn't. The money had come through a clean, legal path that didn't trace back to Daniel. That's exactly what Daniel wanted. He also paid a visit to Noah's school. He spoke to the principal privately and asked about the boy's performance. The principal, a kind woman in her 50s, lit up as soon as she heard Noah's name. "That boy is special," she said. "Very sharp, kind, a little quiet, but always ready to help others." Daniel smiled. He had never met Noah, but he felt proud, like an uncle watching a young star rise. He offered the school a generous donation through one of his charities, asking only one thing in return: that Noah be given a full scholarship and extra support. Again, everything was done quietly. Emily didn't know. Noah didn't know. But they started noticing changes. Noah suddenly had free access to school books, new learning materials, invitations to weekend science classes that he once couldn't afford. Emily was grateful but confused. "I don't know how this is happening," she told Daniel one evening as they sipped coffee outside the diner. "Maybe the world is finally being kind to you," he replied gently. She laughed softly. "It feels strange. I've never been this lucky." Daniel wanted to tell her everything right then. He wanted to say, "Emily, this is me. I'm the reason behind all this." But he held back. He wanted the right moment. He wanted the surprise to be complete. But more than the plan, something else was happening between them, something Daniel hadn't expected. Feelings every day. As he saw Emily smile a little more, laugh a little louder, he felt something growing inside him. Not just admiration or friendships, something deeper. A quiet warmth in his chest whenever she looked at him. A strange kind of joy when she touched his arm while laughing. And every night, when he thought about her, he didn't just feel proud of helping her. He felt connected deeply, like two threads of the same story had finally found each other again after being torn apart for years. Emily, too, was changing. Slowly, she smiled more. Her walk was lighter. She talked about Noah with pride and told Daniel stories about funny things that happened during her shift. She didn't know why, but she felt safe around him. She felt like she could breathe a little more when he was near. His presence was calm, gentle, and kind. He never asked for anything. He just listened, truly listened, and that meant more to her than he could ever understand. One evening, Daniel brought her a small notebook as a gift. It was wrapped in brown paper with a green ribbon. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it." She unwrapped the gift slowly and found a handmade leather notebook with the words "Write Again" engraved on the cover. Her hands froze. "Daniel," she whispered. "I remember how much you used to love writing," he said softly. "Thought maybe it's time you started again." Emily stared at the notebook for a long time. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she smiled, a real, full, warm smile that made Daniel's heart skip a beat. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she went home, and for the first time in years, she wrote. Not a long story, just a short one. A few lines about a woman who had forgotten how to dream, and a stranger who reminded her how little did she know. The stranger was not a stranger at all. As the days passed, changes continued. Emily was given more responsibility at work. Her manager started letting her handle orders, manage the cash register, even take care of supplier meetings. She felt proud but confused. Why was she being trusted with so much suddenly? And then one day, something truly surprising happened. Her manager called her into the office. He looked serious. "What's wrong?" she asked. He smiled. "Nothing bad, just you're being promoted." "Promoted?" She blinked.
What?
"To what?" "To owner." Emily stared at him like he had spoken in a different language. "What do you mean?" "The new owners decided to hand over the diner to someone who deserves it, someone who has given their heart and soul to this place." "That's you, Emily." She shook her head. "This has to be a mistake. I can't afford to buy this place. You're not buying it. It's being given to you. All legal papers will be in your name, fully paid, fully yours." Her hands trembled. "Why? Why me?" "Because you're the heart of this place," the manager said with a smile. "And because sometimes the world does something right." Tears fell from her eyes. She couldn't stop them. For the first time in years, she cried not from pain, but from overwhelming emotion. She didn't know how this miracle happened. She didn't understand who made it happen. But she felt something deep in her soul shift. A heavy weight lifted. A new door opened. That evening, Daniel found her sitting outside the diner, hugging the notebook he gave her. Looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. "They gave me the diner," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. She stared at him. Something in his eyes made her pause. Did you have something to do with this?" He smiled, not answering right away. Instead, he said, "Do you like surprises?" She nodded slowly. "Then let's save the full story for another day." Emily laughed through her tears, and as the sun set behind them, Daniel knew everything was going according to plan. But this story wasn't about just helping someone. It was about something bigger. 2 lives, 2 hearts. Finally finding their way back, Emily couldn't believe it. She sat in the office of the diner, holding the legal documents in her shaking hands. Her name was written clearly across the top in bold letters, Emily Shaw. Owner, it felt like a dream, like something out of one of the stories she used to write. For a moment, she thought maybe someone was playing a cruel joke on her, but the manager smiled warmly and said, "It's all real. The place is yours now." Her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't speak. She had worked at this diner for 6 years, wiping tables, carrying heavy trays, staying late into the night, and now, just like that, she was the owner. How was this possible? She had no money to buy it, and no rich relative to leave it to. She hadn't even asked for a promotion. Yet here it was, the biggest blessing of her life, landing quietly in her lap. Daniel was standing outside the diner when she came out. Her eyes were still wet, her face full of emotion. She held the papers tightly against her chest, like they might disappear if she let go. "They gave it to me," she whispered, almost as if she was scared to say it out loud. Daniel smiled gently. "I know." Emily looked at him closely. With something in his eyes, something soft and warm that made her heart beat faster. "Did you know this would happen?" she asked. "I did," he said. She stared at him. Did you do this?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked down at his feet, then back at her. "Wanted you to have something that you've always deserved. You've given so much to this place. You've given so much to everyone. It was time someone gave something back to you." Her heart was racing, but why? "Why would you do all this for me?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Because you were there for me when no one else was. When I had nothing, no money, no confidence, no support. You sat with me when no one else would. You defended me when others laughed. You believed in me when even I didn't believe in myself." Emily shook her head slowly, tears falling down her cheeks. "But that was years ago, Daniel." "And I never forgot," he said softly. "You saved me in ways you never understood. And I swore to myself that if I ever had the chance to help you the way you helped me, I would." Emily was overwhelmed. She didn't know whether to cry or hug him or run away and scream from the emotion. Her whole world had changed in just a few minutes. And now she found out it was all because of Daniel, the quiet boy from school who had grown into a billionaire and never stopped remembering her. "You've been doing all of this, haven't you?" she whispered. "The rent, Noah's school, the new shelves, the notebooks, the cafe plan. It was all you." Daniel nodded slowly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything," he replied. "I didn't want you to think this was charity. I just wanted to help, quietly, respectfully, because you deserve it." "Emily, not because I feel sorry for you, but because I admire you more than you'll ever know." Emily wiped her face with her sleeve, but the tears kept coming. "You changed? My life?" Daniel took a step closer. "You changed mine first." For a long time, they stood in silence, just looking at each other. The cars passed by. The lights of the diner glowed behind them. Somewhere, someone was playing a soft tune on a guitar down the street. But in that moment, it felt like the whole world had paused just for them. The next few days felt like a beautiful dream. The news spread quickly across the town. Emily Shaw was now the owner of the diner. People who once treated her like just another waitress suddenly started looking at her with new respect. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years came by to congratulate her. Customers left bigger tips. Even the staff began calling her boss, though she still insisted on wiping tables and making coffee like before. But there was more Daniel had arranged for the final stage of his surprise to unfold. One evening, Emily arrived at the diner to find a group of workers outside. Confused, she asked one of them, "What's going on?" The man smiled. "We were told to begin phase 2 of the renovation." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Phase 2? "Yes, ma'am. We're turning the diner into a book cafe." Emily froze. It was the exact dream she had written in her old notebook, though. One Daniel had gifted her. A cozy little place where people could eat, drink coffee, and read books. A warm corner for single mothers, students, old couples, and everyone in between. Daniel walked up behind her, holding a rolled-up sketch in his hands. He unrolled it and showed her the new plan. Shelves of books by the windows, reading nooks. With soft cushions, a small children's corner with tiny tables, and even a space for local writers to do readings or book signings. Emily stared at the drawing in shock. "How did you—" "I saw your sketch that day," Daniel said. "I never forgot it." Tears filled her eyes again. She was crying so often these days, but for once it felt good, not painful. "Healing. You've already given me so much," she whispered. "And I'm not done yet," Daniel said, smiling. "This is your place now. Make it everything you've ever dreamed of." They began working on the changes together. Every evening, after closing, Emily and Daniel would sit together, choosing colors, book titles, and decorations. She picked children's books for the kids section. He ordered fairy tale lights to hang above the reading corners. She found second-hand books from a local shop. He bought new coffee machines to improve the cafe menu. The place began to transform, slowly but beautifully. And while the cafe changed, so did the connection between them. They weren't just old friends anymore. Something deeper had begun to grow. Emily noticed how Daniel smiled differently when he looked at her, how he always remembered her favorite tea, how he never talked about his billionaire world unless she asked. He treated her like an equal, like someone important, someone worthy of love, not because of money or beauty, but because of her soul. Noah also started getting close to Daniel. The boy, who was often quiet around strangers, began calling him Uncle D. They would play chess after school, and Daniel taught him little puzzles and coding tricks. One night, Noah whispered to his mom, "Uncle D is cool. He makes you smile more." Emily smiled at her son, hugging him close. One afternoon, a customer asked her, "Is he your boyfriend?" She blushed. "No, just a friend." But that night, she lay awake in bed, wondering, what if he could be more than that? Daniel, too, was fighting feelings. He had loved her quietly for weeks, but he didn't want to rush her. He didn't want to confuse gratitude with love. He wanted her to be free, to choose him only if her heart truly wanted it. It's not because he had helped her. Then came a moment that changed everything. It was the grand reopening of the cafe. Shelves were filled with books. The place smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Fairy lights sparkled softly. Local musicians played in one corner. Children read stories on beanbags. Town had never seen a place like this before. People poured in with wide eyes and warm smiles. Emily stood in the center, wearing a soft blue dress, greeting everyone with joy. Her heart was full. This was everything she had dreamed of and more. Daniel watched her from a distance, proud and nervous. He had one more surprise. As the night grew quieter, he asked everyone to gather near the front. He stepped up with a microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "But this evening isn't about books or coffee. It's about one woman. A woman who gave everything she had to her family, to her work, to this town. A woman who never gave up, even when life tried to break her. This place, this dream cafe, is possible only because of her. Emily Shaw." The crowd clapped, and Emily's eyes filled with tears again. Daniel continued. "Many of you may not know this, but I was once the boy in school who had no friends, no future, no money. And there was one person who believed in me, who gave me courage. That person was Emily. And today, I stand here not as a billionaire or a businessman, but as someone deeply grateful. Emily, you changed my life. I hope I've helped change yours." The crowd was silent. Then Daniel turned to her. "There's one last thing." He walked to her and held her hand. The entire room faded away in her eyes. "I love you, Emily," he said simply. Gasps and smiles spread across the room. "I loved you even when we were kids. I just didn't know what it was back then. And when I found you again, I knew I couldn't let you go. And I didn't want to buy your love. I just wanted you to know that even after everything, you still have someone who will never leave your side." Emily didn't speak. She stepped closer, touched his cheek, and whispered, "I love you too, Daniel. Always have." And as they kissed, under the soft cafe lights, surrounded by books and joy and everything they once only dreamed of, the crowd clapped, Noah cheered, and somewhere in her heart, Emily knew. She was finally home, not just in a cafe, but in love, in life, in everything. The weeks after the cafe's grand opening passed like a beautiful dream. Emily still woke up early, just like before, but now her mornings were filled with joy instead of stress. She wasn't hurrying to catch the bus or wondering how she would pay rent. Instead, she smiled every morning as she looked at the cafe sign that now had her name under it, Emily's Story Caf. It was her idea, her dream come true, and her story was written all over it. The walls were lined with books, the lights were warm and golden, and the air always smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon muffins. Each day, new customers walked in, curious about the cafe everyone in town was talking about. Children ran to the little reading corner where colorful beanbags and fairy lights waited for them. Mothers sat and read books while sipping tea. Old couples came and smiled, saying it reminded them of better times. And in the middle of it all, Emily walked from table to table, talking to everyone with the kindness and care that had always made her special. Daniel, too, was a big part of the cafe now. He didn't act like a billionaire, didn't wear expensive suits or talk about big deals, wore a simple shirt, jeans, and sometimes an apron. He helped behind the counter, washed dishes, and even learned how to make Emily's special hot chocolate recipe, which was now the cafe's most popular drink. People loved seeing him there, and most of them still didn't know who he really was. They just saw him as a good man who loved a good woman. Emily and Daniel were now more than just old-school friends. Their love had grown quietly, gently, like a flower blooming after a long winter. They didn't need fancy dates or big words. Sometimes, just a smile or a small touch of the hand was enough to say everything they felt. They laughed together, shared memories, and made new ones. Noah adored Daniel. He would run to him after school, jump into his arms, and excitedly talk about his day. The bond between them grew deeper with every passing day. Millie often watched them with tears in her eyes, thinking how lucky she was. One evening after the cafe closed and the last customer had left, Emily and Daniel sat on the rooftop, looking at the stars. It had become their little tradition. "In the day under the night sky with a blanket and 2 cups of tea, you know," Daniel said, holding her hand. "If someone had told me years ago that I'd end up here, in a small-town cafe, holding your hand, I wouldn't have believed them." Emily smiled. "And if someone had told me I'd own a book cafe with fairy lights in a reading corner, I would have laughed. But here we are," he said softly. She looked at him. "Do you ever miss your old life? The big city, the meetings, the money?" Daniel thought for a moment and then shook his head. "No, I don't miss it. I had everything, but I didn't have peace. Here, with you, with Noah, I feel something I never felt before." "What's that?" she asked. "Home," he replied. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time in many years, she felt truly safe. But life wasn't always easy, even in happy times. There were challenges, too. Managing the cafe was hard work. Some days the orders got mixed up, deliveries arrived late, or equipment broke down. But Emily never gave up. She learned to handle problems with calmness and strength. Daniel helped in every way he could, using his business mind to organize finances, train staff, and even build a website for the cafe. Customers could now order online, and the cafe started getting attention beyond the small town. A local newspaper came one day to do a feature on the cafe. The journalist asked Emily how the cafe started. She looked at Daniel. smiled and said, "It began with a boy I met in school. I helped him once, not knowing that one day he would come back and change my entire life." The article was published with the headline, "She helped him when he had nothing. Now he's given her everything." Story touched people's hearts. Across the country, soon letters started arriving at the cafe. People wrote to say how the story gave them hope. Some shared their own dreams. Some asked how they could help single mothers or support small cafes in their towns. Emily read every letter and sometimes cried. She decided to start a community wall in the cafe, where people could pin their own stories, dreams, or words of encouragement. One letter stood out. It came from a young girl named Layla. She wrote, "Dear Emily, I live with my grandma and work 2 jobs. I want to be a writer, but life is hard. Reading your story gave me hope. If you could open a cafe, maybe I can write my book too. Thank you for reminding me not to give up. Love, Layla." Emily wrote back to her and included a special gift, a handmade notebook with the words, "Write your story," on the cover. Daniel had it printed, and they started selling those notebooks at the cafe to inspire others. As the cafe became more popular, Emily got an idea. She decided to start a weekly event called Story Nights, where people could come and share their life stories, poems, or dreams in front of others. The first night was quiet. Only a few people came. But by the 3rd week, the cafe was full. People of all ages stood up and spoke. Some laughed, some cried, some were nervous, but everyone felt heard. Daniel was the guest speaker one night. He stood up and told his full story, how he was once a lonely boy who had no future, how one girl's kindness changed his life, and how he never forgot her. When he finished, the entire room stood and clapped. Emily hugged him tightly, and Noah smiled from the corner, proud of the man he now called Dad in his heart. Yes, Noah had started calling Daniel Dad. It had happened naturally one evening when Daniel picked him up from school. Noah had run into his arms and said, "Hi, Dad," then froze, realizing what he'd said. Daniel had smiled and hugged him even tighter. "I love you, buddy," he said. Emily, watching from the doorway, had tears in her eyes. She knew then, without a doubt, Daniel wasn't just part of her story. He was her forever. Then came a beautiful morning in spring. The cafe was decorated with flowers. A small crowd had gathered outside. Emily thought it was just another community event, but Daniel had other plans. He had been waiting for the perfect moment. He stood in front of the cafe, holding Emily's hand, and suddenly got down on one knee. People gasped. Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Emily Shaw," he said, looking up at her, "you gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love without asking for anything. You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful person I've ever known. Will you marry me?" Everyone held their breath. Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks. She nodded with a bright smile. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The crowd cheered, and Noah ran forward to hug them both. Daniel placed the ring on her finger, a simple silver band, not too flashy, but meaningful. Inside the ring were the words, "My story began with you." Their wedding was simple, but full of love. It took place in the backyard of the cafe, under a wooden arch covered in white flowers. Only close friends, staff, and townspeople attended. Noah stood beside Daniel, proud and excited. Emily wore a beautiful cream-colored dress, and Daniel wore a gray suit. They exchanged vows with tears in their eyes and laughter in their hearts. After the ceremony, they danced under the stars. It wasn't a royal wedding. There were no cameras or paparazzi. But to Emily and Daniel, it was more special than anything money could buy. Later that night, the guests had left and the lights were dim. Emily and Daniel sat in their usual spot on the rooftop. "Did you ever imagine this would be our life?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but I'm glad it is." She leaned on his shoulder. "Thank you for finding me." "Thank you for never giving up on me," he whispered back. They sat in silence, holding hands. Below them, the cafe lights flickered warmly. Inside, their photos hung on the walls. Books lined the shelves. Dreams whispered through the pages. and love lived in every corner. The poor waitress who once had nothing now had everything. Not just because of the man who returned, but because she had always carried hope in her heart, even in the darkest times. And Daniel, the billionaire, who once had everything but felt empty, finally found the one thing he was missing all along, home inside a heart that never forgot. Their story was no longer just about loss, pain, or waiting. It was a story of return, redemption, and the quiet, powerful kind of love that grows when no one is watching. And in the warm glow of a cafe built from kindness, their happy ending was only the beginning.